With the ceasefire agreement finally in place, so many questions. Starting with, will it hold? If it does, what does the future have in store for Palestinians in Gaza? How are Israeli media outlets telling this story? And what about Western media organizations, the ones that acted as apologists for an Israeli genocide? What will be left of their reputations? We begin with the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, an agreement that brings to an end more than 460 days of Israel's genocidal assault on the occupied Gaza Strip. If adhered to, and that is a big question, it will allow for the release of both Israeli and Palestinian captives, the return of displaced Palestinians, the supply of aid, and the gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces from key parts of Gaza. This agreement could have been reached months ago. It is virtually the same text as one discussed back in May of last year. The fact it has taken this long is an indictment of U.S. President Joe Biden's role in perpetuating the war, his refusal to force Benjamin Netanyahu to end it earlier. And, at least according to the Israeli media, it is a sign of the pressure exerted on Netanyahu by the incoming president, Donald Trump. The agreement has been the subject of all kinds of media speculation, briefings, and misdirection, even after it was signed. To discuss that and the chances of its success, we are joined by Diana Buttu, a Palestinian human rights lawyer and former negotiator. Ms. Buttu, first of all, thanks for joining us again here at the Listening Post. Let's start with the ceasefire agreement itself and what it means for Palestinians, but also what we've seen since it was announced, the narrative being pushed by Benjamin Netanyahu that Hamas is reneging on the terms of this deal. Why does that tactic sound familiar to me?
The tactic is familiar because he's been doing this all along. Look, the reason that he's trying to delay this as much as possible is because he wants to get in as many last shots as possible. Plus, he's afraid of his coalition collapsing. So, in other words, for him, attacking Gaza and carrying out a genocide is actually good for his political career. So he's going to do anything possible to try to delay this as much as possible.
This week, there was also a flood of reporting, including in Israeli news outlets, that recognized the obvious, that Prime Minister Netanyahu never did want that deal, repeatedly did everything he could to scuttle it. What did you make of that reporting, its emergence in those circles? How new is that to Israeli media consumers?
It was clear from way back when, actually even as far back as March of 2024, what the outline of this agreement was going to be. And it was clear that he was pushing for it not to be signed, which is why the United States ended up abstaining from the UN Security Council resolution. And then in May, he also was the person who refused to have this deal. Why is it being revealed now? Because Israelis want to see an end to this. They are tired, the economy is in shambles, etc. This isn't out of love for Palestinians, by the way. This is simply for their own self-interest that they want to see this come to an end. Israel's been ostracized. It's now difficult for their soldiers to travel around the world, as it should be. People are talking about accountability. And so the reason that we're now seeing this come to light is because there is some pressure for Netanyahu to actually reach this agreement and for it to pass in the cabinet.
Still, Netanyahu's surrogates in the Israeli media seem to be going through a painful readjustment of their worldview. Many are calling this a capitulation forced on them by Donald Trump. Are they right on that? And what has this discussion looked like in right-wing media circles in Israel?
So in the right-wing media circles, this is being labeled a capitulation.
זה כישלון קולוסאלי של המדינה, שלנו כישלון נוראי, בלתי נתפס.
שעוד לא ברור אם הוא נגדנו או בעדנו, אנחנו נכנעים, כי זו כניעה.
הדבר היחידי שאני מכיר בצורת לחימה זה של טראמפ, שאיך הוא קיפל את נתניהו בטרם הוא נכנס לתפקידו.
In fact, some of them are labeling Trump, if you can believe it, they're labeling Trump as Hamas, as being a Hamas supporter. Is this a capitulation? I doubt it. I think that Netanyahu is probably being rewarded very handsomely for this agreement. And the things that I expect that he's going to get rewards for, everything from removing the sanctions against the few settlers, making sure that that annexation is allowed to pass, making sure that Israel is allowed to take more Palestinian and Syrian land, and trying to do everything possible to completely shut down UNRWA. So I don't think that this is being done because Trump believes that genocide should come to an end. I think this is being done, and Netanyahu is being rewarded, which is exactly the opposite. We shouldn't be rewarding people who've been carrying out genocide for the past 15 months.
One thing that has become clear after 15 months of live-streamed genocide is that nobody anywhere can say that they did not know. So I wonder what you make of some of the reporting we saw from the likes of 60 Minutes in the US and MSNBC this past week, suddenly doing the kind of reporting, using the kind of language they should have been using for more than a year now.
You're absolutely right. Nobody can claim that they didn't know. There are people who are choosing not to look, and there are people who are excusing genocide, but nobody can say that they did not know. In fact, one of the things that has been the most jarring of this is that as we've seen Palestinians live stream their own genocide, we've also been seeing that Israel has systematically attacked Palestinian journalists who are trying to get the world to see what's happening. And it's been radio silence. Not only have we not heard journalists speak up against the attacks on their own, as one would expect, but we've also seen people somehow turn a blind eye and ignore the massive destruction that Israel has meted on Gaza. And so why is it that this is happening now? It's hard to say. But I can say that all of this information has been there. And in fact, some of the reporting that happened on 60 Minutes was footage that they've had for months and months and months on end and just simply chose to sit on. And so it says a lot when we're living in a world where journalists are not believed simply because they are Palestinian journalists, and that in which journalists are not defending and standing up for their own when their own are being systematically targeted by the Israelis.
Well, to me, what 60 Minutes and MSNBC are now doing looks like a late attempt at image restoration. Do you think we'll be seeing more of this in not just the American media, but in media overseas, BBC in the UK, Deutsche Welle in Germany? Can it possibly work for those organizations?
I fully expect that in a year's time, we are going to be seeing people who claim that they were always opposed to the genocide. There's going to be a lot of revisionism because the level of destruction is so huge. This isn't just a question of destroying homes and buildings, but of every aspect of society. And I do think that we're going to get a turnaround at one point in time where we see editorials talk about the damage that Israel has caused and the genocide, just in the same way that we saw in the aftermath of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. That now it's hard to find outlets that say that they were supportive when at the time they were serving as the cheerleader to the U.S. invasion. So it's really a question of whether they're going to be able to get away with it. I certainly hope that they won't. I hope that people are savvy enough to recognize that it's the role of media not to serve as the spokesperson of governments or to be parroting Israeli talking points, but to really interrogate those people who are in positions of power and to question what it is that they're doing, not to believe the talking points and the lies, but instead examine what Israel's doing from the standpoint of its victims, meaning from the standpoint of Palestinians. That was what the role of media was and is, and yet it's failed when it comes to Gaza.
Last one for you. The level of violence the Israeli military has unleashed on Gaza has broken every conceivable norm, seems to signal a terrifying new era of warfare in which anything and everything is permissible if you have the right governments in your corner. When you look at how this has been reported, what do you think will be the lasting impacts on journalism, faith in media globally?
If the people who have carried out this genocide are not held to account, we're looking at a world in which there is no international legal system. There are no international norms. There is no equality. There is no rule of law. It's simply rule by power. And that's a very scary world for us to be living in, one in which it's ruled by power and not ruled by law. The whole point of creating this international legal system was to guard against genocide. And yet we haven't seen that that's happened. But it's not only that it hasn't happened on a global scale, but it hasn't happened because a lot of media has been cheerleading on this genocide or excusing it. For example, if I, as a Palestinian, say that Israel is committing genocide, it's questioned by the Western media as though somehow I'm saying inflammatory remarks. And yet we have decisions by the International Court of Justice saying that there's a plausible case for genocide. We have the Amnesty International, which has issued its report. We have what we see is happening on the ground with the systematic destruction of the healthcare system, of buildings, of all aspects of Palestinian life. When you look and see that 88% of the buildings have been destroyed, that the water supply has been destroyed, that there's no electricity, no telecommunications, that starvation is being used as a tool. When you have indictments by the International Criminal Court, what I'm saying when I say genocide is not just an opinion or an inflammatory statement, it's the truth. And yet, rather than journalists questioning what Israel's doing, they instead are questioning Palestinians for their lived experience and putting the onus and blame on us. That's the part that is truly disturbing in all of this. Will it change after 15 months of genocide? I certainly hope so. If anything, what has happened in Gaza, Israel's genocide in Gaza, shines a spotlight on the failures of a lot of media to actually report properly on genocide. And instead, they've been falling into the both sidesism or this idea that somehow we just have to take what Israel says as word on its face, only when they're saying the good things and not when they're saying statements like, kill them all, finish them, there are no innocents in Gaza.
Diana Buttu, it's always great to get your point of view. Thanks again for speaking with us here at the Listening Post today.
Thank you for having me.
The return of Donald Trump to the White House is another huge media story. His inauguration will take place as the most destructive wildfires in the history of Los Angeles keep on burning. The authorities in LA are trying to contain the flames as well as a tidal wave of misinformation. One of the biggest purveyors of that, given the size of his social media following, has been Elon Musk. As the owner of X, Musk has injected himself into this story. He's using it to take aim at California's Democratic leadership, sometimes contorting the facts to attack the state's progressive policies, its response to this emergency. Musk is also meddling in domestic politics in places like the UK and Germany, using his mega platform to push a hard-right agenda. He does not appear to be satisfied with the return his huge investment in the Trump campaign, $250 million, has landed him, a job in the new administration. Elon Musk wants more. He always does. There is a difference between misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation is when someone spreads fake news without knowing it's false. Disinformation is spreading it when you know better, fanning the flames. As the fires raged in Los Angeles, feeding on gale force winds that had a climate change feel to them, the state's governor met with the president, and both terms came up.
There were hurricane force winds of mis and disinformation lies. People want to divide this country, and we're going to have to address that as well.
Elon Musk's name was not raised in that exchange, but it could have been. The world's richest man has used his platform, X, to either mis- or disinform Americans about why the LA fires have been so bad, on the water shortages there, on the emergency response, all while giving short shrift to the major driver of this disaster, shifting climate patterns. Musk has been de-emphasizing the cause, going all in on the effect.
His claim that basically there wasn't enough water to fight the fires. This was actually shown in an actual discussion with a firefighter trying to combat the fires, who said, no, that's not the problem.
There was water. We have several reservoirs.
The problems are actually that the scale of the fires means that delivering water, no matter how much they have, is basically impossible.
There's just been a sundry number of claims on X that are just based on complete innuendo, exaggeration, or sometimes pure falsehood that Elon is amplifying across the platform just to score political points and win the day on the internet. And lots of people on social media mindlessly share it, and emergency officials in California are incredibly frustrated because lives are on the line here, and Elon Musk is making sport of it.
The other examples is him joining a chorus of people claiming that somehow DEI initiatives, diversity, equity and inclusion, was responsible for some kind of inadequate response to the fires.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone.
The DEI issue surfaced after the mayor of Los Angeles and the fire chief there started appearing on camera, briefing reporters. Elon Musk's fixation with diverse hiring practices has grown as he has shifted to the right politically in Donald Trump's direction. He has become an echo chamber for the anti-woke agenda that so many conservative voices have taken to and sprinkled around social media sites. Politically, they've long had California, a blue progressive state that has never voted for Trump, in their crosshairs. And in Governor Gavin Newsom, they see a potential Democratic presidential candidate in 2028. But most of the anti-woke types in America were born in the USA. Elon Musk was born and raised in apartheid-era South Africa. A white South African lecturing Americans on the perils of diversity, equity, and inclusion is a little rich.
This is part of a broader right-wing playbook that you see attacking DEI initiatives. The fact that the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, is a black woman.
Elon Musk says that you're utterly incompetent. Are you considering your position?
The head of the Los Angeles Fire Department is a gay woman. So there are continually these identity-based attempts to undermine people in charge rather than sort of focusing on fact-based information and broader, maybe more systemic challenges that may have contributed to the proliferation of the fire.
Musk has sort of long been this sort of meme-y, almost edgelordy type of person, you know, saying weird or otherwise borderline inappropriate things. But what we've seen is his increasing closeness with people of the far right who previously might have been banned from the platform, people who hold white nationalist or racist perspectives, pushing this particular narrative around demonizing diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, even though that has nothing to do with this moment of the fires.
The sort of backlash against DEI is really interesting. I'm going to quote a line that seemed to emerge from the internet, which is, "To the privileged, equality feels like repression." That if you're on the top of the pile, attempts to introduce greater equality do lower your comparative status within society. That's the kind of thing that threatens people like Musk, people like Trump. Yeah, DEI, there are instances where it's got problems, I'm sure, but actually the reason people are pushing back against it is because it threatens their privileged position.
Elon Musk is flexing his political muscle across the Atlantic, wading into British politics, backing the right-wing Reform Party while undermining its leader, Nigel Farage, who Musk says is just not up to the job. But Musk's main focus in Europe is not on London. It's on Berlin and the AfD, the Alternative for Germany party that is so far right that the country's judiciary and its domestic intelligence agency now classify it as a suspected extremist organization. Recent polling indicated the AfD was already Germany's second most popular party before Musk got involved.
And people really need to get behind the AfD, and otherwise things are going to get very, very much worse in Germany.
Interviewing its leader, posting that on the platform he owns and controls, where he can push the accounts of those he agrees with and suppress the ones of those he doesn't. The common denominator for Musk in Germany, the UK, and the US? Immigration.
AfD is an incredibly anti-immigrant party. They have come to power predominantly as a reactionary party to the German asylum system that welcomed people from the Middle East during the Syrian crisis in 2015, and that is part of Musk's through line on immigration, the idea of who's being allowed in, demographic replacement, and whether or not these people have a place in what he and others consider to be Western society. And in that way, there is a lot of ideological alignment between what Musk has been saying around the UK and the US and within the EU.
The AFD is, much like Trump's agenda, openly anti-immigrant, nationalist in some ways. Elon's attempt to sway the election and bolster AFD is also an attempt to make sure that Trump's agenda encounters as few barriers as possible. But beyond that, he actually wrote in an op-ed for a German newspaper that part of the reason that he was being so vocal is because his companies operate in Germany. So part of this is just naked self-interest.
One really ironic thing, though, about his support of the AFD, I was in Berlin covering all of the protests around his big Tesla plant in Brandenburg, right outside of Berlin, and the AFD was opposed to the construction of that site. It's a major, major facility for the production of Teslas, and Elon was fighting the AFD and criticizing them and saying they're this sort of like far-right neo-Nazi group. Look now, he's embracing them. So when it comes to ideological consistency, you're not going to find it in Elon Musk.
What you will find in Musk is that ideology comes a distant second to self-interest. When he tells his followers that you are the media now, he's not out to empower them or simply disempower legacy media outlets. He wants to empower himself, bolster his platform, and increase the disproportionate influence that one man already has on democracies, such as the one Donald Trump is about to take over in Washington.
When Musk says that people are losing trust in the media or somehow his users are the media now, he's the one driving that. He's choosing who to amplify. He's choosing what good or bad information means on his platform. A very small group of very wealthy people are benefiting immensely from the weakening of the media and what information people have access to or what is readily presented to them.
You also have in Trump someone who repeatedly derides and undermines trust in the media. Given the reach and scale of X, it's quite possible that information, whether it's true or not, that circulates on that platform can reach more people than journalists can.
Really hit hard, these gusts, and that is the problem for all of these firefighters.
So I really hope that Elon is not correct and that everyday people on X, including people peddling disinformation, replace journalists. I think that that would be really scary for democracy.
And finally, back to Gaza, and the moment this past Wednesday that a journalist, Al Jazeera Arabic's Anas al-Sharif, announced that the ceasefire agreement had been reached. Sharif, who kept reporting from northern Gaza while more than 200 of his journalistic colleagues had been killed by Israeli forces, many of them targeted, made a point of removing his body armor as he spoke.
بعد هذه الأيام العصيبة بعد عام ونصف ممكن أن نتحدث وممكن أن نخلع هذه الخوذة الميادة التي أرهقتني طوال هذه الفترة وأيضا هذا الدرع الذي كان جزء من جسدي خلال هذه المدة وخلال هذه الفترة الطويلة والذي كان على مدار الوقت يرافقني والآن نعلن هنا من داخل قطاع غزة ومن داخل مدينة غزة هذا الإعلان ووقف إطلاق النار. أستذكر الزميل إسماعيل الغول الذي كان سيقف هنا مكاني ليعلن هذا الخبر. نفتقد الزميل إسماعيل الغول، نفتقد الزميل رامي الريفي، نفتقد الزميل سامر أبو دقة، حمزة الدحدوح.
However, Palestinians know all too well that hope is fragile, often stolen before it can prove real. Later that same day, Sharif put his body armor back on when Israel resumed its shelling and bombardment, killing Palestinians as they celebrated the ceasefire in the streets, then targeting them in the tents where they have taken shelter. This war will go down in history, alongside some of humanity's worst moments. And Israel appears intent on killing more and more Palestinians right up until this ceasefire takes effect.